Hey everybody, John from Bike Fit Advisor. So I wanted to share just a little bit from a bike fit that I did earlier this week. It brought up a couple of interesting points, and so I thought I'd just go over a few of those here and kind of show you what was going on. It might help a few of you out there. And what this specifically shows is how you can have a very common problem, just an imbalance maybe in your body. And when it's coupled with another equally fairly small problem on the bike as far as your fit goes, it can really get magnified often into a pretty significant issue, as it did in this case. So this particular bike fit was with another elite level collegiate cyclist, and this cyclist was experiencing some knee pain on both sides for the most part. And other than this knee pain, he was actually doing pretty well. He didn't really have too many other symptoms on the bike. And that can be, misleading sometimes, because when you're, 20 years old, often not a whole bunch bothers you anyway. So I knew we would have to go digging a little bit more. When I tested him off the bike, the only thing that really stood out was he did have an imbalance in his hip motion. He was a little more restricted through the right hip, especially into internal rotation. And this did show also in some of the hip stability exercises that we tested him on as well. So let me just jump right into the data and what we found after we did all the infrared and the saddle pressure setup, etc. And it was pretty drastic right off the bat. The first thing that jumped out was he did have a pretty large discrepancy right to left in his knee extension at the bottom of the pedal stroke. So, for instance, here, this is the right leg. His knee extension, this is not going to be exactly because I'm just doing this quickly. Actually, that's pretty close. So he actually, on the right side, had about a 30-degree angle that he was 30 degrees from full extension. On the right side, on the left side, it was an 8-degree difference. He was at 38 degrees. 30 degrees is pushing it as far as being, essentially pretty tall. You're really reaching when you're at 30 degrees. 38, is definitely more in the middle of the range as we'd expect. So I knew as soon as I saw this that there was, something fairly drastic going on. And this did carry over into his ankle as well. He actually had great, sort of a fairly large difference in how his ankle moved. When we look at it, relative to the top of the pedal stroke here, and how it changes. So we look at, the angle that his foot is at here, roughly, and I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm not going to take all these angles necessarily, compared to where he ended up, especially in this position, where you can see, a pretty large change in how his foot is oriented. And so, and this was also, like I said, the right side, there was more of this happening than the left. It still was occurring on the left, just more it was definitely magnified on the right. And just to round things out, I did notice that he did have some discrepancy here at the hips. He was sitting a bit skewed on the saddle, and it was pretty clear from the infrared data, especially, that he had a shift to the left side. So he was actually shifted over to the left side of the saddle. And then the last thing, his left knee tracking, essentially what path his knee moved, did it move away from the bike or towards the bike? It was like I said, it was pretty unsettled. It was really moving out at a much different angle than the right side. So when we got into the saddle pressure, this is where we started out, and you can see he's got a lot of loading on the right side. And that's kind of it. If you notice this red line and these black squiggly lines here, that kind of tells us where the motion is occurring, and really all of it is occurring to the right side of the saddle here. And so this was pretty pronounced. You can kind of tell he was not unloading from this right side very much. Now, luckily, he didn't really have any major saddle issues, but you can see this right side just never really lets go. It's kind of always in contact. And this little red dot scrolling around here, you can see that's the sort of the center of motion for the pelvis, you might think of it as. And it's really, everything is on that right side. Okay, so what did I think was going on here? Well, it became pretty clear because of his hip motion, because of how the ankles were moving and the feet were changing posture so drastically. The result of that being all this discrepancy in how one leg was extending a lot more than the other. I began to suspect, pretty easy to determine, that there was some pretty significant stability issues happening with I felt it was happening at two spots, certainly at the pelvis, because we had a really skewed posture on the seat, and then also I think through his feet. I just felt like there was a lot of, based on some of the measurements, especially some of those foot and ankle measurements, that his feet there were some things going on that we definitely needed to track down and figure out. And again, this instability that I'm talking about is, if we look at it here, again, I'm just going to just drop these lines really quickly here to see. You can kind of see what angle his foot is at the top of the pedal stroke. Okay, and then if we track forward, this is, the initiation of the power phase from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We go there, you can see, pretty drastically that foot that heel really dropped down. And ideally at this 3 o'clock position, we'd still want this heel up a little bit more. We would want him to be in a toe down posture, just a couple of degrees at the very least. But the fact that he's dropping past there, and again, this did happen on the left side as well, just a little bit, it was a little bit less pronounced. So let's get to what corrections did I make? And actually, this was pretty simple. This, I kind of had the feeling this was going to require just a couple of small changes, and it turned out, I think, to be the case. We'll kind of see as we go along here, but all I did was I did move his cleats back. And so let me show you, if we look at his cleat position, this is the way that they were set up when he came in. And so first of all, he had look Keo pedals, and you can see he's got the cleats slid forward here. But you also notice this is not a standard look Keo cleat. It's an aftermarket version, which are kind of I've had the experience with them that often they're not able to be adjusted as much as the standard look Keo cleats are able to be. So we did adjust these, and I did move these cleats back. There's still a possibility we might need to bring them back further, however. And you can almost see it. There's really faint, but right here, there's a little line. That's actually where the center of the pedal axle is, and you can see it's well behind. This is actually a marking dot for the first metatarsal head. It's on the outside of the shoe, but the first metatarsal is on this side over here. And that's important because, one, that the pedal spindle is in front of that. And also we have to remember that with metatarsals, they actually, they kind of cascade further back. So the first one is here, and then it kind of comes back at an angle. So many of his metatarsals, or the balls of his feet, are actually behind that pedal spindle. And I think this is certainly a significant cause for some of that instability that he was having through his feet. So now let's look at the results. Just from a numbers standpoint, I could see on the infrared that actually it was showing up that he was evening out on the saddle a little bit. We actually saw some good progress there. He wasn't as twisted. He did have less aberrant left knee motion. That actually went down a couple of degrees. It was tracking in, or at least more vertically by 2 or 3 degrees. And he also had, we started to see a decrease of about 2 to 3 degrees at least of that discrepancy between the right and the left. We took a shot on both sides, and we were down to, instead of an 8-degree difference, we were down to about a 5 or a 6 degree difference, which again is a good start. We're not expecting to take the whole bite right now. We're gonna kind of nibble at this so that his body has time to adapt. And then if we go to the saddle pressure here, this is where we end up. And so you can see he's starting to get a little bit of motion over to this left side. You can see by the red line how it's crossing the midline here, but it's pretty apparent like he's actually starting to load the saddle a little more evenly, and actually he's starting to load the saddle a little further back as well. So I think this is a pretty good establishment of he's got a little better, there's some stability occurring here. There's a lot of these things are going to kind of keep adapting and changing, but we'll be able to manage a lot of this very easily since we've done all the heavy lifting already. So as I mentioned, this client, he might need new cleats. It may benefit him. We'll have to address that the next time he comes in, because he'll come back in a few weeks. And we may need to opt for some actual Keo cleats if we're still struggling with that fore-aft placement, and we're still struggling with some of that stability through the foot. But this is a really good start. He's clearly more stable through the feet. And actually, I think Let me see if I think I have an after. So here's an after, and this is on the left side, but this is still a good example because both things were happening. So you can see at the top of the pedal stroke here, we still have that angle that we were talking about with that heel dropped. Oops, that was skewed there. So we can kind of see the angle that foot is coming down at on that one. And then if we go forward, let's go to 3 o'clock or as close as we can get. We're pretty close there, and you can see, I know it's blurry, it's not perfect. I was not thinking that I'd be recording this one, and so I didn't have all the light I wanted, but you can see we actually have a positive toe down posture here. And so this is good. This means we're actually establishing a little more stability here and through the feet. So again, he'll keep changing, but this is a really good start for things. And this is a really awesome example of having a small issue with the body, then a small bike fit issue, and it magnifies into this very large thing. Now, we actually will be able, I think, be able to resolve a lot of this, but it's going to take some time. And incidentally, I did give him some exercises to kind of work on that hip mobility and that balance. So let me know what you think of this. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments below. And that's all I have for this one. Thanks, everyone. I will see you next time.